Hi, I'm Lonna Kelly, and this is Hudson Valley Arts Speak. Thanks for tuning in, and hope you enjoy the show. Today I'm going to be talking to Deborah Rafferty Oswald. Deborah is a historical fiction writer, and she's written a book for young adults, and she's in the process of writing a sequel to the book. And I'd just like to welcome you to the show, Deborah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So how did you get started in writing?
I've been writing since I'm about 9 years old. I used to write stories based on pictures that I used to draw. I used to write characters. I'd give them a name. I'd give them an age. And before I realized it, I was writing more about them than I was actually drawing pictures. I was not a talented illustrator, but the stories started from just characters that I've been carrying around in my head since I was a kid. I wrote for my school newspaper and my school literary magazine at Mahopac High School. Continued writing through college. Then I pursued a career in teaching, so that went on the back burner a little bit, and picked it up again as an adult. I took a correspondence course with the Institute of Children's Literature when I was on a maternity leave with my second daughter. This was before the internet, so you actually would write a story, put it in an envelope, and mail it to a mentor author.
Mail it back and forth.
And then the mentor author would mail it back, and she asked me about my interests, and I was always very interested in the Victorian and Edwardian eras and time periods, and she said, why don't you write a story set in one of those time periods, because the research would be a pleasure. And that was where I found what I really wanted to write about.
So it was a good direction for you to go into.
It was perfect.
Yeah.
A perfect fit.
Yeah. And you have really focused down on a local area that you're writing about.
Yes, it all began when I moved from Mahopac to Brewster in 1991, and the former owners of our home presented me with the Brewster Bicentennial book because they had ancestors who were covered in the book. And I was fascinated by the history and the characters, especially the prominent women of Southeast. And that got me started. And there were a few prominent figures that I was like, I wanted to learn more about them. And I wanted to write about Brewster at 100 years ago in the World War I era. But at the time, I had one daughter in kindergarten, and I had a newborn, and I spoke to an author who said, well, I do a lot of my research at the New York Public Library. That wasn't really an option for me then, so I just put the kindergarten daughter on the bus, and I brought the newborn in an infant carrier over to the Brewster Library, and again, pre-internet, pulled up these amazing bound copies of the Brewster Standard from the 1800s through about, I think, the 1980s. They were bound in like 2-foot-high books, and also I would bring it up on microfiche, and I would just scan the newspapers for articles that caught my fancy and inspired me to write about things that happened, a little bit, some fictionalized accounts. And that's the way I like to spend my time. You get the news of the day. In about 1918, everything was World War I, the Spanish influenza. But you would also find out about baseball teams. You would find out about the weather. You would find out about the price of groceries, gallon of gas, car prices. So it's like one-stop shopping for a historical researcher is archival newspapers.
Yeah, how great that Brewster had such a rich
I just
collection.
I lucked out.
Yeah.
Now it's so easy. I just do it on the internet through Mahopac Public Library. But back then, I would go down into the research room.
Yeah, so all that material's been digitized?
It has been, yes. Very easy to do now.
Yeah, yeah. So tell us a little bit about the book that you wrote.
The idea started when I was going through, actually, the Putnam County Courier. They used to have a feature called Glimpse of the Past, and they would have historic photographs. And one that really caught my eye was a photograph of a group of women who attended the Drew Seminary for girls at around the turn of the century. And there was one girl in the middle who was noticeably younger and smaller in stature than the other girls, but she was trying to wear her hair in the fashionable Gibson girl style at the time. She had the same shirt waist, and I just was drawn to her. I'm like, what's her story? Why is she trying to look older? Why is she trying to look like everyone else? From there, I went to the Putnam historian's office, and they had this fantastic collection of, I had access to report cards, student rosters, the school handbook, the school literary magazine, photographs. It was wonderful for me. I was able to get copies of everything, and I started researching what it was like to be a student at the Drew Seminary for girls at 1917, 1918. Then I went through newspaper articles that I had clipped, and I came upon an article from 1929 where a recent Drew Seminary graduate had jumped out of an airplane to her death in Long Island, and she left a suicide note. And this really jarred me. She was 18 years old.
Yeah, when I read that in your notes, I was just shocked.
I was shocked when I read it. She became, at the time, the first person known to commit suicide from jumping out of an airplane. And I took her suicide note, and in the summer, I assist author Gail Carson Levine at the Brewster Library as a children's writing workshop. And Gail was teaching the students how to write certain types of poetry. And I took words from her suicide note and I put it into the poetry. And I thought, this is an idea for a book. At about that time that I found that article, I was reading up on current news events that had to do with teens committing suicide due to cyberbullying. And I almost married the two. Now, there wasn't cyberbullying in 1918. Bullying is as old as the hills. So I thought, what could have driven this girl to take her own life at 18? And that's where the seeds of the story happened. So I had my protagonist, who came to be known as Jay McKenna, daughter of struggling Irish immigrant dairy farmers. I found out that Borden's condensery, which was in Brewster, had just left Brewster. So all the dairy farmers who brought their milk to Borden's condensery were basically thrown out of work. So a huge source of income was lost there. I had the mother, many of the farm housewives worked in the canning departments in the evening shifts. Second income was lost too. So here's Jay McKenna, 14-year-old farm girl, and she wins a Borden scholarship. I renamed it the Haviland Seminary for Girls. She wins a scholarship, and lo and behold, on the day before she's going to leave home for the first time and go to this fancy girls' school, a biplane flies over her family farm in Brewster, and a girl jumps. So I have that as on the first few pages of my story. Jay witnesses this girl jumping from a plane. She's scared stiff when she finds out that the girl was a student at Haviland Seminary for girls. So she goes away, first time away from home, lives in a dorm, and Jay is a fish out of water. She is not sophisticated. She was educated in the public school system in Brewster. Most of these girls went to private schools, and she becomes a target of bullying herself.
Let me just ask you a question in terms of the education for girls in that time. Did girls generally graduate from high school or from elementary school, or what was? No.
That's why I placed really some rather privileged young women as students at this school. So no, graduation was not always the norm. There were still one-room schoolhouses. There were still parents who needed their children home on the farm.
Right.
And many girls were, unfortunately, were conditioned to marry young. So it was not a priority in Jay's life. But I wanted to make her the exception, and I also wanted to make her the underdog exception.
Right.
And so I needed to create for Jay role models outside the family.
Yeah. Now, one other question. How much money, you said that your heroine got a scholarship, so how much did a school like that cost in those days?
In those days, I'm sure it was a lot. Today, it's laughable. When I saw it was about, I would say, $100.
Yeah.
And there were charges that sounded a little silly to me, like for $1 you could get your meals delivered to your room if you didn't even want to go to the dining hall. You were expected to bring your own napkin ring and your silver.
Oh, really?
And your own teaspoon. And it was a different era. I think they wanted to teach young ladies to be young ladies.
Yeah.
So that's why bringing this farm girl there who was eating like cold tongue and cabbage for dinner with the farm hands, and going into this place where you had to know where to place your napkin and your forks and your knives. I just wanted to make her as uncomfortable as I possibly could.
Yeah.
and as unwelcome.
Yeah. So you have self-published your book?
I did.
Yeah. What kind of a trip was that, a journey was that?
It was, what a long, strange trip it's been, as the Grateful Dead. I tried for 22 years, different publishers and different agents. I'm going to admit some of my earlier versions, if I was an agent, I would have rejected it as well. It was trial and error. You know, I went to school for education. As far as writing, it's been trial and error. It was just about a year ago now, we had an author come to Pequannock Elementary School, where I teach the 5th grade, and she was talking about how she was a traditionally published writer, but craved the freedom of self-publishing. And I was like, you know what? It's time to try something different. It's gonna, I could plaster my walls with rejection letters, so it was time to try something different. And I made every mistake you possibly could. I thought that I would get this done over summer vacation last year. I hired proofreaders who made more mistakes than there were already in the book. I went on the internet to find book cover artists who never even sent anything. So I basically could write a book now on what not to do when you get self-published. So I'm going to do better next time.
So you could have a new income source in addition to being a writer. You could be a advisor on how to.
Yes, and self-publishing for dummies.
Yeah.
I could write it.
Okay, well, our time is up.
Wow.
Went fast.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I appreciate that history lesson that kind of went along with all of this.
It's been wonderful. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.